Good afternoon and good evening to everyone joining us from the different parts of the world. Welcome to another insightful session hosted by Qualitative Research Connect or QLRC. Today's webinar is entitled Trustworthiness, a Continuous Process. Our speaker today is a qualitative strategist. She taught and conducted qualitative research at the University of Northern Colorado, Indiana University Northwest, and Concordia University, Chicago. Her work spans adolescent and adult literacy, qualitative inquiry, and various methods, including creative and arts-based practices. Veronica's current scholarship explores the integration of AI into qualitative research and doctoral writing pedagogy, highlighting the evolving role of technology in research and teaching practices. Without much further ado, let's all welcome Dr. Veronica Richard.
Hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I hope that you can hear me okay. I'm very excited about this presentation. It's been something on my mind lately in terms of how is our trustworthiness processes changing? How much are they staying the same? What do we need to be concerned about as we move forward? So first, if you would indulge me just a little bit, and just enter in some words into the chat, that, words or short phrases that you associate with, qualitative research. Yeah, quality. Oh, contextual. Yes. Phenomenology. In-depth treatment. Yeah. Rigor. Deep exploration. Yes. So as we go throughout the day, or the morning or evening, and we're discussing this, I'm curious to see if anything changes in your words and phrases, and maybe we can have this discussion in the Q&A at the end. Okay, so some general definitions about what trustworthiness is in everyday world. I came up with a couple of definitions from different dictionaries. So quality or state of being trustworthy, able to be trusted, worthy of confidence, and dependable. And I'd never actually looked up the definition of trustworthiness before, especially in terms of qualitative research in a general way. But we actually see some of the terms that we use in qualitative research with this idea of dependability. And so we're going to continue to explore, again, these ideas surrounding trustworthiness. In a more formal aspect in qualitative research, we have this definition from Stahl and King in 2020, that trustworthiness encompasses the idea that when readers interpret the written work, they will have a sense of confidence in what the researcher has reported. I found this quote particularly interesting because when originally I was thinking of trustworthiness, it was about my actions as a researcher. But now I'm seeing it's kind of a twofold process. It's not only about me, but how my audience then interprets what it is that I do and put forth. So another aspect of this led me to some questions. So how can we build or establish trust for the consumers of our research? And can the findings be trusted? And there are other questions that different scholars put forward in terms of our trustworthiness. But I still think both have the essence of the researcher and then the consumer of that research. So in general terms, we've had since I've started in the field of qualitative research, four main areas or criterion that have to do with trustworthiness: credibility, confirmability, dependability, and transferability. And then more recently, reflexivity has come into the fold. And so as we go today, I'm going to be talking about these five areas, but I'm treating reflexivity as a piece of all of the other four. So to me, it kind of spans across the four other criterion, and you'll see that as we go. And please let me know if you have any questions or anything like that. So in credibility, we are looking to use strategies that convey to the reader that we are trustworthy, that we have carried out our due diligence, if you will. And then that's on the researcher side. On the consumer side, they're looking at, are the findings plausible? Do they make sense? Do they match a sense of reality, given the information provided? And do the findings reflect the data presented? Then, in terms of confirmability, the researcher uses strategies again to confirm their findings. And then the reader or consumer of the research is wondering, okay, are the strategies to confirm reflected in the writing? And this is where some of the problems might come into play as we are carrying out our processes in conducting research and then presenting that research. For dependability, we're looking at using acceptable methods and processes. Are the methods and processes reported and connected to prior scholars in the field that are honored? And sometimes that maybe have been omitted from the research setting for whatever reason. And then transferability is, the researcher's ability to use rich description. We've heard that a lot for anyone who's been in the field for any amount of time. And details that focus on contextual aspects now, I think, is really becoming more and more prevalent. And someone had put in the chat the idea of context. And I think that that is, for qualitative research, one of the key areas that we need to consider. And then for the audience here are the contextual aspects of the findings presented. And then if I were to add another bullet here, I think I would have said, based on those presentations of the information, can I determine whether or not this study can be applied to my situation? And then finally, reflexivity is a continuous monitoring that the researcher does regarding their own perspectives, assumptions, and how those perspectives and assumptions shape the inquiry. And then the reader then is hopefully asking, are relative reflexive details presented? And again, these come into some considerations in terms of how much we can present and what we choose to present, and perhaps what is required of us in terms of the journals that we're publishing in or the platforms that we are using to share our research. So I'm going to go through each criterion on its own and just kind of talk through some ideas that I have, some of which have been in the field for a long time, and others of which I've started to think about in my work with my clients, in my work with students, and wondering how we are addressing these areas. So, um, in the images or the visuals that I present here, I tried to show this dual process between the researcher and then the consumer. So the researcher is presented in purple, and then the consumer is, and pardon my misspelling here of consumer, I'm just noticing, um, but that's in a teal color, okay? And so I wanted to kind of convey that that is happening. It's a double-sided area. So in terms of trustworthiness and using strategies that convey trust and reliance, triangulation is probably the one strategy that is used the most. And I think one of the reasons why in qualitative research is because of the different areas, and we see five main areas here. And so um, we have methodological triangulation. I think this area gets and method triangulation kind of gets smushed together. But I like to tease them apart because for me, methodological means that I'm using two different paradigms of research. So qualitative or quantitative, that aspect, and I'm using both of those together. I could also be using research design triangulation using multiple designs within one paradigm. Um, and so that aspect is also, for me, a way of qualitative researchers triangulating methodologically. The next way is methods. And when I'm speaking of methods, I'm meaning how we sample, how we identify our sample and choose. I might use different methods for different types of populations. Um, I might be using different data collection methods, interviews and observations, or material data. Um, and then I can also be using different methods of analysis. I could be using an inductive method analysis or a deductive and merging them together. Um, all of which, as many of you may or may not know, but it also extends our time. So we have to be thinking in terms of um, uh, what is feasible for us to do also, and that becomes one of those considerations. We can also triangulate with participants, having different levels of participants. For example, I could have teachers and leadership. I could have executive leaders and management. Those types of differences in our participants can also be seen as a way of triangulating. Now, theory is another one of those areas that seminal researchers have identified, like Denson and Lincoln, Guba and Lincoln, in terms of triangulation. For me, this poses a bit of a problem because a lot of people that I see in qualitative research do not necessarily use the theory within the research. They just show that this is a paradigm or a lens through which they are viewing the problem at hand or the topic. But the theory is not informing their research per se. It becomes more of like a participant or a researcher positionality. Okay, so for me, in order for theory to be a part of triangulation, I have to be using that theory in some way in my data collection and or my data analysis. And then finally, researcher triangulation is having multiple researchers. Okay, the next area that scholars have identified as a piece of credibility is extended time in the field. This could include multiple participant interactions, repeated site visits for observations. It could be multiple documents over time as well, or material data. And then these interactions, if you will, would also perhaps occur at different times of the day or year, or different times of the cycle of whatever phenomenon it is that we are exploring. And the third area is member checking. This area for me too isn't, I think sometimes as researchers, we do the lowest level of member checking, which would be to share their transcripts with the participants. And while yes, that's involving them, I don't see that as important as sharing our initial findings with them, or getting their feedback on the findings, seeing what has been reflected that matches their experiences, and perhaps what's missing. And that would kind of fall into those more of collaboration with the participants, which could then lead into these participatory practices in which they're actually helping us guide the research. Okay, our next area is confirmability and dependability. I put the two together because I see a lot of crossing, if you will, between the two areas. So here we're concerned with what are the strategies that confirm that the findings are grounded in the data, or what are we doing to make sure that the data are accurate, and to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to convey this sense of dependability. And then for the consumer on this side, do our processes meet their expectations? This is something I think is one of those areas of a hidden curriculum. This idea of meeting expectations, it's there, but oftentimes it's not explicit. And I'll be mentioning this a little bit later as well. So to begin in this area, the audit trail, a researcher's audit trail, the decisions that we've made and reasons why, the changes made from the beginning to the end of the research and why those were made, the data collection and analysis tool development, and perhaps again that some changes occur within there, and then ethical practices beyond IRB. I think that our ethical practices actually have a bigger role, more like reflexivity, because I think that it spans across all areas of trustworthiness. I just wanted to mention that. I didn't present it that way, but I do believe that that is the case. One of the things that I didn't really find a lot of people talking about, but again, seems to be this area that is implicit, is the use of acceptable practices. And those acceptable practices depend upon who we are citing, who is appropriate to cite in our field. The reader checking to see if we've used audio and video recordings or some way of checking for accuracy. And then for me, our level to which we are reporting our criteria for sampling, participants, and material data, those intentional processes that we use to choose purposively, I think is really important. And sometimes I think that our material data or document data sometimes doesn't get reported in terms of, unless it's a systematic review. But in an actual empirical study, I see less of this. So for me, that's an area that we could do better with. And then representing of findings aligns with the research design and the data that we've collected. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. So member checking here comes back into play, so I won't go over it again, but I do believe that it is connected. And then the fourth area here in a more explicit way is reflexivity. And this is where our researcher positionality comes into play, our reporting, our awareness of our assumptions and our biases. Now, and for me, I don't have a problem with my biases and my assumptions. As a matter of fact, I believe that that is what makes me the researcher who I am. But I do have to be aware of when those ideas are coming forward and noting those and making sure that I am journaling about them, asking myself some difficult questions perhaps of how these areas are influencing how I'm interpreting the data and even interpreting what is important in terms of asking participants about. The final area in terms of trustworthiness is transferability. Now, a lot of people talk about this in, like, I think Gubin and Lincoln and Denson and Lincoln, they talked about transferability second. For me, it becomes this thing that's in the end when I'm actually presenting research, because this is where the consumer really comes into play here. Um, this idea of rich description is super important and probably the thing that I see most often cited or referenced. But what I don't see is how is this description presented forward? So I wanted to really highlight this idea of contextual information, detailed description of participants, and the use of data quotations. And this all becomes problematic as we look forward to our articles and where we are presenting our data, because certain journals have word restrictions. And so almost always where I see authors cutting down is in the methodology section. So that can be really problematic for us in securing or conveying our trustworthiness to our consumers. Connecting to prior research, I don't see this talked about a lot, but for me, when I am assessing articles and determining whether or not they can be used in terms of my research or the arguments that I'm trying to put forward, I'm really trying to see what are the explicit connections that the researcher has made to prior research in relationship to their findings, in relationship to the context, to the participants. This to me is one of those areas that I think that overall we could perhaps do better. Um, I saw in a couple of publications that multiple sites or participant types is another way to convey this idea of transferability, and I agree. But I think it kind of gets mixed up in terms of I'm showing my own transferability within my study versus the consumer being able to apply the findings to their context. So I think this is, again, one of those areas that we need to be aware of. So we can connect to similar or varied context, homogeneous or heterogeneous participants. And then this focus on the particular, I think is a key characteristic of qualitative research, the big Q qual, as Brown and Clark would say, where we honor that particular, and if there are discrepancies within our findings, we present that and show how they are different aspects of truth versus looking for one truth with capital T. Okay, so real quick, going into some thoughts and considerations here. in terms of the qualitative paradigm, I think that there are different levels of how the paradigm is held to, if you will, and that has to do with the researcher themselves and their perspective of qualitative research and what that means, and the field that they're in. If I'm in a field that relies a lot on numerical data and quantitative ways of knowing, I have to um, conform, if you will, in ways that fit into the field. That this to me is a problem is problematic because then our ideas of trustworthiness and what we know to be um, appropriate tends to get pushed aside. So I just point this out because I think that although we've come a long way, it's still happening. And this happens also in the language use. I think a lot of times the language that is associated with trustworthiness, that is also associated with quantitative research, poses problems and keeps a sense of confusion in the field about what trustworthiness means and what researchers are to do to convey trustworthiness. And this comes back to the differences in qualitative research and quantitative research, understandings versus numbers. Second in this area, in terms of qualitative paradigm, is the awareness of who I am in the research. How does my presence alter the environment? How does my presence alter what the participants will convey or share with me? These are the things that reflexivity for me really help me with and help me to change my language if I need to change my language in terms of my participants, in terms of the environment, whatever that may be, so that I'm learning as well as not just gathering data and interpreting data. I need to be learning along the way. And then the idea of replication of processes versus replication of findings. Again, for me, this is two sides here in terms of what happens in qualitative research versus what is perceived in quantitative research. Um, so I would challenge us to think of the appropriateness of replication given our participants, our context and research aims, and embracing conflicting perspectives. It may not be appropriate that the same processes are used in every context. How could, if we're functioning in a responsive and ethical way, I don't know as if we could say that that replication of process is so important. It needs to be about the context and about the people. And then the use of AI for research tasks, the protocol development and refinement, any analysis processes. Um, these are areas that we need to be taking notice and seeing where do we fit in terms of researcher and our use of AI or consuming research that has used AI. Okay, the next area of consideration is transparency and responsibility. So identifying our assumptions and biases, explicit reporting of our processes. Again, can be problematic in article publications, but I think we could maybe provide links. We could do a sense of appendices or something like that that perhaps don't count in the word limitations, but we need to be sharing these ideas for scholars coming into the fold and for scholars who are perhaps pushing the boundaries. We want to know what's happening in the field. Sometimes that's limited based on word count. Um, And then again, back to how the field is changing, perhaps because of technology, is our critical deliberation and tracking of AI use, and making sure that we are leaders in terms of this using of AI. If I don't think that it's going away. So how can we engage in it in ways that fit with our paradigm? And how might the paradigm start to shift because of this technology? Finally, writing expectations. This to me is an area of trustworthiness that is not talked about a whole lot. Establishing a plausible argument and perspective. This is not an easy thing to do, but yet we are constantly required to do this in our scholarship, as in our education, and as we share ideas with others in the field. Knowing and citing established scholars from the field and perhaps those who have been kept out. Representation of context, participants, and data. The appropriateness of what do we need to provide here that's important for others to know. And then this aspect again of limited space. The use of responsive and inclusive language, and making sure that some areas change. And I think Layman's book, 2025, is a beautiful text to be able to start thinking about our language and how we need to be shifting what is automatic that sometimes we don't see. And then the use of AI for writing tasks. I think AI provides us with several opportunities. But we need to be responsible in these opportunities and then report out what we've discovered. So finally, I have some tools for you. I have an audit trail tracking tool. And then I want you to think about a reflexivity plan and what that would mean for you in terms of who is it that I want to be in this research? Who is it that I want to be in this setting? Who do I need to be for my participants and others? And then in my work with clients who are dissertating, committee and supervisor communication expectations are critical. I see so many people who there is a block in the communication, and that becomes problematic for process evolving. And so if you have any questions about committee and supervisor communication, please let me know, and I will share with you some other tools that I have. But I hope I hit my time frame here. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Veronica. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. Yes, thank you so much for sharing your expertise in making research trustworthy. So may I request our participants to write your questions through chat with your name and where you are from. You may write the institution you're affiliated with or the country. And we are also excited to invite you to the second Global Qualitative Research Conference happening on September 7 to 9, 2026 at Cebu Technological University, Cebu City, Philippines. And good news, the deadline for the abstract submission is extended until Friday this week, June 5, 2026. If you're here in the Philippines, that is tomorrow. This is a hybrid conference, so you can present and participate from anywhere in the world if traveling to the Philippines is not possible. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from renowned keynote speakers, Braun and Clark, leading experts in qualitative research. Interested in becoming a certified qualitative researcher? Qualibay offers a range of certification courses tailored to your needs. Explore available programs at www.qualibaylearnworlds.com. Be a part of a dynamic global community of qualitative researchers, and we look forward to seeing you on site or online. So, for our first question, okay, let me read the first question. This question is from Dr. Maria from Colorado. What do you find to be the top issues novice researchers have in trustworthiness?
I would say probably the top issues are knowing, there's so much scholarship out there already, right? And so it's kind of knowing the history. I think it reminds me, my bachelor's is in English, and I remember one of my professors saying, if you're going to break the rules in terms of grammar and punctuation, you have to know the rules first and have reasons why you're breaking those rules, right? And I think that's one of those areas that is, we have to give a nod at least to those who've come before so that then we can move forward. And without having that behind us, I think that it's problematic for novice researchers in just knowing everything. There's so much to come to know, and this process of becoming a researcher, I think that's part of it, is learning who should I be acknowledging here, and perhaps why, knowing why, and then making a informed decision, and just knowing all the ins and outs. And I would say the other thing is being explicit. One of the things that I work with students all the time is they're using a sentence where 5 need to be presented. So that we know exactly what's going on. I think the assumption is, and it makes sense, right? Because what do we read? We read articles. And in those articles, the methods are always minimized. Not always, but for the majority, it's minimized. So then when I go into my dissertation writing, that's what I'm doing. And it's just not, for me at least, it doesn't help us.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question is from Sonia Sharmin. How far trustworthiness contributes in ethnographic research?
Oh, well, now you're getting me to think of something that I missed. I think our design actually matters in terms of trustworthiness and what we need to be presenting to others, what we need to be considering in our own work as we function, because we're so much closer into the communities. Um, so I think that our trustworthiness um, is super, super important along the way. Um, knowing when or if a line is being crossed in ethnographic research, I think can be really hard because we're trying to understand more about the culture, more about the community, or whatever the phenomenon is. And as we are becoming more of an insider, if you will, I think that causes us maybe not to be able to see um, when we maybe need to be reflexive. in our thinking. So I would say, especially in trustworthiness, I mean, I think that that's all the time, but, excuse me, not in trustworthiness, in ethnographic research, this is a consideration that I would almost force myself to be in a routine of reflecting of how things went throughout the research. And so I think that intentionality needs to be bumped up in terms of ethnographic research.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. Among the different aspects of trustworthiness, and you added reflexivity, yeah? Which do researchers commonly struggle or you struggle with the most? And what practical strategies can help address these challenges?
Yeah, I think it is reflexivity. Um, and I think it's double-sided. In some ways, um, we're too cautious and we're in that mode of trying to put our biases beside, which I don't think is even possible. But it's like, oh well, I can't think that because that's my experience. But within that, that's the reason why I'm interested in what I'm interested in. I mean, I am in it, right? I am in it all the way. But I don't think people see it that way. In quantitative research, the research questions are still guiding what happens. Who comes up with that? The researcher, right? And so I think that aspect of being involved is the best thing, and we just have to be aware of when that happens. So one of those strategies or tools that I think Maria uh, put in the chat for me, it was a tracking document. It's not comprehensive, but I've tried to take it from the IRB approval process all the way through the analysis. And I'm realizing now that I need to add in my representing of the data in that. But I think anytime we can start to really track our ideas and our thinking along the way, I think that's when we learn more about ourselves. And I would say that in our process of learning about others, I hope that we learn more about ourselves as well as we go.
Yeah, I totally agree because it's almost impossible not to put your interpretation, that's the beauty of qualitative research because you put your personality there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree to that insight. Okay, another question. Given that trustworthiness is a continuous process, right? Rather than a final outcome, how can researchers ensure that trustworthiness is maintained
Mm.
throughout all stages of the research process rather than merely addressed during reporting?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the considerations at the end of my presentation, I said, who do I want to be in this research? Who is it? How do I want to function in this research? And I think those types of questions need to be asked in the forefront. And perhaps the assumption that our ethical processes are done at IRB always needs to be challenged, because we don't know what's going to come up. We don't know in the different contexts that I'm entering into, or that I don't know unless I'm interviewing my friend base. And even then, I don't know what they're going to choose to disclose, right? And so I think awareness along the way, I think questioning ourselves as we go, um, it gets, I think, I think I see people just going through the motions rather than taking things at a, I don't want, serious is not the word I'm looking for, but if someone is willing to take the time to spend with me and share their experiences with me, I better be doing my best to carry out this act of trustworthiness for them, for myself, and for the reader all together. And I think it just I think you're right. I think sometimes trustworthiness is looked at as an afterthought rather than at the beginning too. And so maybe if we can start conveying that it is this process, it is a process. Maybe that's what we need to be um, sharing, is that it actually is a process. It's not something that is a one-time thing that we just, you know, explain away. No, this is about who I am as a researcher.
And may I add to that, it seems like it's encouraging us to be more reflective, yeah,
Yeah.
from the start until we finish it. It's like that is maybe the memo, the memo wing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? The memo wing can come and be of use so that you will be able to keep on track on what you want to convey or to interpret or to communicate in your research study. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. And I
Beautiful.
think this is the last question. This question is all about AI. So with the increasing use of digital tools and AI in research, what emerging considerations should researchers keep in mind to establish and maintain trustworthiness both today and in the future? Because we don't know what the future may bring. Maybe it's already AI writing for us, but now it seems like AI can write for us. So what do
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, I think that we need to be um, tracking our processes within the whatever chatbot we are using. We need to know what the how the chatbots have been trained so that we know the biases that are presented within the tool itself. Um, I think that's something that can be easily overlooked, and people just go, "Oh, well, this is the one I prefer," and they go with that. Um, but just like in terms of inductive versus deductive analysis, if I don't know the limitations within each of those, then I'm not doing my due diligence as a researcher in knowing um, what I'm missing out on, perhaps by choosing one or the other. Um, I think that I need to be educated. I need to continually educate myself on things are changing so fast and it seems so overwhelming right now. I get it. But but if we're going to use the tools, we gotta know what they're designed to do, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, so that then I can build in processes that cross-check for those things. Um, I know one of the things that I'll just say it and hopefully someone doesn't know and you'll learn a little something, but in all chatbots, the more we stick with one thread, the more mistakes it makes. So what you want to do is be in one thread or one question, if you will, and adding on only like maybe 4 times. And then once you get to that part, start a new thread. And it will function much better and hold true with the lowercase t, to more of what we're hoping to generate. Because we need to be the front runners in the generation. We are the guide. And so tracking our prompting and the outputs and being critical, making changes, track the prompting, and it's like this cyclical process, right? But again, knowing when the tools start to falter and what to do about it.
Wow, now we know. That's new information. Thank you so much, Dr. Veronica. And
Thank
yes,
you.
once again, thank you, Dr. Veronica, for sharing your expertise with us today. We also want to extend our heartfelt appreciation to all our webinar participants. Your presence and engagement made this session a success. A recording of today's webinar will be available on our website, www.qlrconnect.com, within the next 48 hours. For your certificate of attendance, it is only given to active registered QLRC members. The time frame to apply to a certificate of webinar attendance has been extended from 7 days to 14 days. When submitting a request by email to info@qlrconnect.com, participants must include their membership certificate number, which can be found at the top left of the membership certificate. And for the question that you have in the chat box, how can you be a regular attendee of this webinar? You can go to our website. Yes, the one that I said, the www.qlrconnect.com. So we also have our Facebook account, Qualitative Research Connect. We are also in Instagram and TikTok. So anywhere in the social media, we are there, so you will never miss any one of our webinars. And of course, if you would like to be an official member or part of this Qualitative Research Connect community, we warmly invite you to visit our website and complete the membership form. And don't miss our next webinar next month on July 2, 2026. Thank you once again. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from the different parts of the world. Mabuhay!